Hi everyone, I'm WarcryLive. I've been playing PoE for about a decade and wanted to share what I've theory-crafted for the upcoming PoE 2 launch in light of the decent chunk of passive tree notables as well as most of our skill and support gems have been revealed in the past week. As you can see, I've drawn up a little draft tree here. This is, of course, disclaimer, all highly speculative. I'm going to start off with the Ascendency, move into sort of the links and skills that I'll be using, and then finish it off with the tree and kind of running through each of these one by one. But the gist of the build will be a self-cast Arc Lightning caster, Stormweaver Sorceress with potential, given if that will even be an opportunity to do so in early access, to path through Pain Attunements and grab some low life and ES scaling as we move on as well. We will be mainly stacking mana on this build, and it'll be an Archmage build, so Mind Over Matter will play a big part in our defenses as well. And from everything we've seen so far, mana stacking and Archmage will be a pretty strong component in the meta, simply due to the fact that the node, if I can find it here, states that all damage is taken from mana before life, in comparison to PoE 1's version where we're sitting around 40%. This lets us scale around this pretty funkily and have Leech play a big role in that as well. So starting off with the Ascendency, the node I'm most excited about, Tempest Caller, trigger an elemental storm on crit with spells. I'll play a quick video on screen if I have it, but what we've seen, it's basically a vortex. Imagine cast on crit vortex for PoE 1 referencing. And this can have all sorts of cool interactions with sort of status effects and any sort of debuffs on enemies that we can apply through this, as well as just simple damage scaling. Given that we can only use one single support gem for each skill, really, it's good that our main skill is a sort of chain archetype, whereas these elemental storms we can then link with increased area of effect and some other debuffing gems that I'll get to later. We also have Strike Twice, which lets us scale stack two shocks on each of our enemies. Shock is quite a large damage multiplier, so I'm quite excited to see and scale how we can scale this moving into PoE 2 early access. And lastly, Shape of Storms. It provides all of our damage from hits, contributing to shock stance, so we can also scale other ailments in damage-wise, should that be sort of possible through endgame rares and whatnot. Just before jumping into the main link, we have heard some rumors, although this isn't confirmed, that one of the nodes for Sorceress will involve having a permanent uptime on Arcane Surge, which we have reason to believe will be much stronger in PoE 2 compared to 1, just simply because of the support gem that's been revealed so far, requiring us to spend 100% of our mana pool. This is quite a steep requirement, so based off of the sort of cast speed and mana regeneration that the sample text here tells us that we'll get, we could even assume that these might be more multipliers, for example 10% more of each, which is also why I'm not running Arcane Surge as a support gem in any of the links right now, because I'm assuming that we might get it somehow through the Ascendency. If not, then that's something that we can replace one of our gems with in one of our setups, or look into other creative ways of obtaining. So starting off with our main link setup, Arc, we can see here that we're gaining 50% more damage for each remaining chain, which is why I'm looking to add the chain support gem here, because we can see we're not really losing much in terms of damage, because we're gaining +1 to chains, so that's 3 chains, and doubling that by 100%, so 6 chains. We're multiplying our damage by 6-fold, even though we're cutting it in half. So it gives us a nice sort of AoE clear that we can also then swap out should we want to go for sort of single target setups for bossing. This will be a crit build, so we'll be looking to use critical damage or increase crit strikes if that's necessary first off in our link setup. I'll be using faster casting. Lightning Mastery, this is kind of a placeholder. I'm not sure if this will be the best in slot for damage late game, but currently that's what I planned to put in my link setup. And lastly, Lightning Pen. All these gems, of course, we might find out that certain gems work better than others, but this is kind of my placeholder skeleton going into PoE 2. There are certain buffs that I'm particularly excited about. One being Mana Tempest, which targets buff causes beams from lightning spells that cost mana to also chain to 2+ targets while chaining, but not to chain further from those targets. In addition to giving us some extra damage, of course, but also really giving us a high ramp mana drain. So the way I'm interpreting this chain here to function is, let's say we have an arc that chains to 6 enemies. Our first arc would hit the first enemies for that threefold or 300% more damage. That then would also spread to 2 additional enemies, but not chain on from them. Then our main chain would go on to the next enemy at a 250% damage multiplier. That would then chain to 2 additional ones, and then moving on to the third, that chaining to 2 additional ones, but those not chaining further, but the main one continuing to chain. So in effect, from let's say, standing in a Mana Tempest and shooting your arc out of pack, we're going from having our arc target 6 enemies to suddenly target 16. So the clear speed here, I feel like, will be really phenomenal to see, and with just almost a Vol arc set up for PoE1 fans, and how that might work. We also have Orb of Storms, which works quite well for sort of a single target buff that we can place down. Elemental Focus, just more elemental damage. I'm assuming we don't need to apply shock here because we're already doing so with our arc. Lightning Exposure is something we could fit into this, as well as Clarity, kind of giving us that increased mana regen while we're having our mana drained by Mana Tempest. Don't necessarily need to socket this into any of our spirit reserving auras. I think the buffs will do just fine with that. And lastly, Empower Damage, for giving us that 15% more damage buff while we're using any of these buffs. I think that's my sort of starter idea on how to run this. In terms of auras, I'm quite keen on running Blasphemy. From everything we've seen, auras in this game will be incredibly strong. Running especially Feeble and Temp Chains defensively seem to be anything if not overtuned this early game, so those numbers might change between now and launch, but from what we've seen, it seems to be quite strong so far. So I'll be running Temp Chains and Feeble, and should it exist, we've seen Flammability already as a leak, so it's not too wild to assume, but Conductivity, if it exists, will be also part of the Blasphemy setup that we'll be running. Now, that being said, I believe we're currently at a 180 spirit cap, so 30 per act in terms of a base character. Whether there'll be ways to get sort of additional spirit, I assume there will be, so kind of bumping an Archmage with that, but should that not be feasible, then we can just drop one of our auras as we see fit. But Archmage requires 100 of our spirit, and that will be a big chunk of our damage gain, namely stating that spells gain 5% of damage as lightning damage for each 100 mana you have, and spells cost an additional 5% of your mana, so you also need to be scaling your regeneration and potentially mana leech quite heftily. So now that we have that out of the way, just going back to our setup on the tree here, I'll just be kind of following the nodes here as I've pathed them, just to showcase what I'm planning on socketing just on the league start. This can be, of course, fine-tuned. Orange represents what I think will be sort of your must-have nodes, what we really want to get. Yellow is sort of alternate options / pathing ways. Blue circles I've signified just because we don't know everything yet, but just based off colors, for example, the mana wheel here and the mana nodes that we have up here, I'm assuming that, you know, we'll have similar nodes here and so forth. So these are just sort of nodes to look out for when the league launches if you're playing Mana Stacker, and sort of how to path accordingly. So we'll be starting off with the Sork start, getting our ES and mana percent starting nodes. We also want to make sure we grab our mana regen, and assuming this is some sort of percent increase mana node, then that as well. I wouldn't quite fly all the way over to Raw Destruction just yet. I'd continue pathing through the middle here, through these mana nodes, and then path back here to get Dampening Shield. for some ES and stun thresholds, because we'll be mainly scaling ES for our life pool, either going CI or low life. Moving on here, going down, there's an option for us to pick up these spell crit nodes, because there's not a lot of sources of increased crit chance for spells that we've seen so far. So I feel like this will be quite a strong node to get. Likewise, this sort of LA wheel here, we can go and grab our lightning pen node to start. Both of these mana nodes here, I think, will be very strong. Pathing upwards from here, we can also see that there is a very simple pen and LA damage node that we can get, but I think late game we might want to drop that. At this point, we have an option of pathing sort of straight vertically or horizontally. My preferred path currently, I'm leaning towards pathing to the right here to grab this jewel socket, and then have right next to that these lightning nodes here. We can tell they're lightning nodes. We can't quite tell what they give yet, but just based off thematic here, which one of these might not, perhaps not all of them, but that might be useful here. Then I'd path up, grab Eldritch Battery. There have been discussions whether Eldritch Battery will actually make it to pre-release currently, because in its current state, citing that all energy shield is converted to mana, it seems a bit too strong. Obviously in this version you wouldn't go low life in CI, but you'd be a life-based character and you'd kind of change the scaling on the tree accordingly. But currently we're not grabbing that, and we're just going up here to these mana nodes, and especially Arcane Intensity riding us with an effective spell damage per mana, which will be incredibly strong for us. Moving up here, I would like to path to the right and grab a Patient Barrier, which will give us 60% increased maximum energy shield at the cost of slower recharge, which won't actually affect us that much based on some notables and keystones that we'll be grabbing later. I then come up here and grab these damage lightning pen and lightning damage per int nodes, as they seem quite decent. Making sure to grab the jewel socket here, pathing to the right, and then grabbing enhanced barrier for that +1 all max res and energy shield. Then pathing down, grabbing this more max life, ES threshold node. Down again, making sure to grab the second jewel socket. Alternatively, stopping there and pathing just straight left. Coming here, these nodes here do seem quite interesting currently, with again increased energy shield and stun threshold for those ES based characters, increasing our ES and reducing our life, which we won't be scaling as much, which will seem quite powerful. We don't know what this node does yet, but perhaps it might be worth cutting all the way around as well. Continuing to path left, making sure that to mind that these nodes here might contain mana in the future, just like these ones here potentially as well. Pathing down here and grabbing Mind Over Matter along the way, right like that. And coming down here, we can see that here we have another ES and mana node that we want to grab, potentially the other side of that as well. Another jewel socket along the way. Coming all the way down here, this seems to be a mana cluster, but it might not be, so just bearing that in mind. Coming down here, so that we can also grab Zealot's Oath. Now this is what I referred to earlier when I said that recharge might not actually matter for us that much, stating that excess life recovery from regen is applied to energy shield, and energy shield does not recharge, so we can actually scale our life regen with our energy shield instead. Assuming that they add a support gem that lets us reserve life instead of spirit for auras in the future, we could run a sort of a cast on crit setup, even with some further lightning spells to further boost their damage, and we could come down here and grab Pain Attunement for more crit multiplier while we're on low life, but we're not sure if that will be possible just yet. So at this point, we'll still have about 20 to 30 points left to allocate on our tree if we're looking at those higher levels. So one option is to come down here, grab this jewel socket, grab some energy shield nodes down here, as well as then path down further this way and grab... Ooh, sorry. Let me just see. Where am I looking here? These lightning nodes here. So we can see that one of these will be cold, one of these will be fire, and one of these will be lightning. So the sort of triple lightning wheel here might be one decent option. Another option might be to path down through the starting area and grab the increased effect of auras from your skills node. That is also another option for us to anoint instead of pathing all the way down here, should we wish to do so. There is also a node down here to the right, to the very right side, that I want to draw attention to. That is my current purple highlight here on the bottom for an anoint, namely a simple 15% more maximum lightning damage, which seems like quite an insane node to miss out on, but it's a bit out of the way of our pathing, so it's not quite one that I'd want to path all the way down to unless we figure out what these red nodes here are upon reveal. So that's kind of the bare bones skeleton of the build so far. Just going over the skills here again. Very much disclaimer, mostly speculative. This is just what I'll be going with at the beginning of the league. I have reason to believe that mana stacking will be fairly decent in this early access. And it'd be interesting to hear what you guys think as well. Do you have any variations of this? Are there any interactions here that I've missed that you guys are aware of? Please do let me know in the comments. And yeah, cheers. Hope everyone has a great league start. All the best.